Good morning. I'm Chris Callahan. I'm the director of Northeast Center to Advance Food Safety with UVM Extension. My other hat is as agricultural engineering faculty with Extension. So I get to have a lot of fun actually in the field, working with growers directly and small processors, and also have found great pleasure from doing my best to coordinate the activities with a lot of help from Elizabeth Newbold of NECAFS, and that means that seeing everybody here in the room just really brings it home every year, and I'm so thrilled that you all made time to be here. I know it takes a commitment to travel and to be here, so thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about NECAFS background because I'm kind of curious for how many people is this the first NECAFS annual meeting that you've attended? Fair number. That's great. Wow, thank you. And how many were here, not here, how many were in Boston for the first NECAFS annual meeting? So that's pretty cool. We've seen a pretty significant growth over the years for this event, and I appreciate that. I'm going to talk a little bit about NECAFS background, where we came from, what we've done so far as a regional center, and when I say we, I mean that. I've done very little. It's been people in this room and others who haven't been able to make it today who've done the work. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're headed. The good news is we just received some sustaining funding through USDA NEFA FSOP, Regional Center Award, to continue for another 3 years. So that's an exciting development, and we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing under that new funding based on the learning of the previous funding, which we're also very grateful for from the FDA that got us started and got us through the first 3 years. You all have programs in front of you, printed programs. If you need one, as Elizabeth said, there are more over by the water, over in the left-hand side of the room. This is it in a nutshell. We're in the welcome and plenary stage. There will be a break at 10 o'clock. And then at 10:30, we'll have state and regional updates. We're doing those a little bit differently this year. We've received plenty of great feedback from you all in the past, and the summary of the feedback was let's highlight state and regional updates and give details in the program. So you'll see that's a change this year. You'll see a lot of there are individual pages in the program with state updates. So that should give you a chance to really dig in more detail, identify the people in the room and outside of the room who you should follow up with for more information about individual programs. We will have some highlights at 10:30 though. 12 o'clock lunch. 1 o'clock is really when the fun begins. We have, by and large, the program for the annual meeting this year is work group meetings. And that was based on feedback from the evaluations last year. People really wanted to dig in more detail with each other in a working group type format. So we heard that loud and clear. The other thing that's happened is over the past year, we've really formalized work group leadership. And so there are people tasked with carrying the work group activity forward throughout the year. And I think you'll see that in the work group meetings and in the next year. This evening we do have a poster session. It's in the same room that we had the welcome reception in last night. That's Kelsey's. It's just past Starbucks on the first floor in the lobby. If you have a poster, setup will be between the end of the work group meetings at 4:30 and 5 o'clock with the start of the poster session. Dinner tonight is out and about in Albany on your own. A lot of great options. If you need help finding a place, probably best to somebody from the area. Raise your hand if you're from the area. I can help you out, I guess. We got a whole table in New York Ag and Markets. Nobody's in Albany? Okay. That's because you're out in the field, right? Yeah. So John, Aaron, I know Aaron has some ideas, even though he claims not to.
I get all my ideas from you, Chris.
Okay, well, there we go. Now we're in trouble. The hotel's very helpful as well, but I am sort of from the area, so I can help. So that's today. Tomorrow we're going to start the day with breakfast, and at the same time we're going to have breakfast in this room. And we will have some updates from our federal partners, USDA and FDA. So that'll be a great chance to get quickly updated on things happening federally. At 9 o'clock, we have another round of work group meetings. And these are both the 1 o'clock work group meetings today and the 9 o'clock work group meetings tomorrow are parallel sessions. And I know that causes some challenges for some people who want to be in both. It really is a balance between having a 4-day program or a 2-day program. And so we're trying to do what we can to compromise there. The other thing to note is we will be keeping careful notes during these work group meetings, and we will be having a report out at 1 o'clock tomorrow. And so to that end, within the work groups, each one will have a facilitator, at least one facilitator, to coordinate the meeting, the work group meeting. We also have some volunteer note takers. Can the note takers stand up? So these are people who have volunteered. We have more, don't we? Is that it? Well, you're going to do great. Thank you. These are students from University of Massachusetts who work with Amanda Kinchlow, who have volunteered to keep careful notes during the work group sessions. I'll talk a little bit more about some of those sessions a little bit later, but between the facilitators and the note takers, we should be able to capture the sense of the meeting and then report out to this group so everybody feels like they were there. And then at 3 o'clock tomorrow, we all shed a tear for one more year, except for the steering team, who gets to keep going until 5 o'clock. So if you're a NECAFS steering team is really the group of advisors that get together once a year in person and then once a year virtually about halfway through the year, review where NECAFS is, how we're doing, and if there are any significant changes we need to make to our programming. So to get started, our goal as NECAFS is to enhance produce safety and preventive controls, training, education, and outreach among small, medium farms and small processors in the Northeast. That's it in a nutshell. It's clearly over the past 3 years become a lot more complex than what this captures. There's a lot going on. Each one of us has a lot of different perspectives on what this looks like on the ground and what it should look like going forward. One of the great things about this meeting for me is putting faces to names and emails and phone numbers. We're on plenty of webinars together and teleconferences together, and this is the place to really try to extend those relationships and deepen them around this goal. This is what we're here for. So NECAFS, in a nutshell, we're all a group of different stakeholders within the food system, university researchers, educators, extension folks, state regulatory and enforcement agency partners, including federal partners. We have local food and farming organizations and other nonprofits represented in the room, industry associations, increasingly small and medium-sized producers and processors and buyers taking part in our activities, and then the other regional centers, the National Center, and as I mentioned, federal partners. Our approach to being a regional center started with what's laid out in the bottom there, establishing a structure, building capacity, competency, and collaboration within the region. So that includes things like the training, becoming lead trainers and becoming grower trainers in the produce safety rule, becoming a trainer in the PCHF rule and Sprouter curriculum. Developing and delivering educational programs, so we provide direct financial support for folks who need a little bit additional funding to make a training happen. So there have been funds available through state CAP funding to do a lot of this, but there are some places where it's not enough to get to where the audience is, or there may be times where there are trainings or trainers that don't have access to that funding. We do have the training support stipend program through NECAFS to support that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Beginning with last year, we started to really initiate our evaluation and assessment of the regional center. Again, in the first phase of the project, it was focused on evaluating NECAFS. It wasn't focused on evaluating the PSA trainings that took place in the region. It wasn't focused on evaluating the PCHF trainings. It was really focused on what has the regional center done and how can we improve. And as a result of that, we've actually made progress on Objective 5, sustaining good work. We received an award from the USDA NEFA Food Safety Outreach Program to continue the work of the regional center for another 3 years, due in large part to progress noted in the evaluation activity. So a little bit of background, because it dawned on me that not everybody would be familiar with this part of our story. NECAFS actually started with a very, very small exploratory discussion that we were calling at the time NEFresh, Post-Harvest Research Extension Service Hub. And it was a group of, I think, about 9 people. We got together with a little bit of funding from NERA to implement a planning grant. And it was really based on some of my observations, and they were shared by others, that we're all working really hard in our states and in our particular communities. We oftentimes don't have a chance to lift our heads up and talk with one another and see what's happening elsewhere and see what we might be able to use, borrow from others to put to use for the people we serve. And a lot of the information that we were finding really lacked regional relevance. And oftentimes it lacked a science-based research foundation. So this was back in 2015, January, and we got together. It was in Amherst, Massachusetts. And this is just an example of the type of things that we sort of organized around. This was trying to capture what are some of the challenges that we have, what are some of the lack of information that we need to dig into. And then toward the end of, this says October 2015, but it really came out a little bit later. It came out toward the end of that discussion. And this is the Framework for Industry Curriculum Development and Dissemination. This is basically the FSMA training plan or FSMA education plan. And on the left-hand side, you can see the federal partners, FDA and USDA, interacting with the education plan through the FSMA Training Collaborative Forum. And on the top half of this chart are the alliances. These are the national curricula reviewed and approved by FDA. And on the bottom are a number of alternate curricula that were identified at that time, one through the Local Foods Cooperative Agreement. Chelsea is here today, I think somewhere. There she is. Chelsea from National Farmers Union leads that program, the Local Foods Cooperative Agreement. And there's also a Tribal Ag Cooperative Agreement. Is anybody here from Tribal Ag Cooperative Agreement? I don't think so. No. But they have an active program as well through University of Arkansas developing an alternate curriculum. This has changed a little bit since October 2015, in particular with the advent of an additionally funded alternate curriculum development program through funded by the FDA. And then also the structure of the regional centers has changed a little bit. We used to be funded 2 by USDA NEFA and 2 by the FDA. Going forward, all of the funding support for the regional centers comes through USDA NEFA, through the FSOP program. And there is no longer an independent national coordination center. It's one of the regional centers that'll serve as a lead regional center. So a little bit more integrated going forward. That lead regional center is at the University of Florida, which also hosts the Southern Regional Center. Was the initial structure identified for NECAFS, and when I was reviewing this recently, it was instructive and interesting for me to just see where we've come since we laid this out. The objectives remain the same by and large. These are on the left-hand side of the slide. These are the objectives that were across the bottom on the initial slide. You know, it's establishing and maintaining a network structure, continuing to build competency, capacity, and collaboration in the region, and actually beyond. We have a lot of friends and partners here from throughout the nation, not just our region. Develop and deliver educational programs, evaluate and assess and sustain good work. And so the structure we had identified is on the right-hand side here, and that largely remains in place. The advisory committee, it turned out to really be served, that function started to be served by the NCC Technical Advisory Council, TAC or TAC, and also by the collaborative forum that was led by our federal partners. We continue to have our steering team. We continue to have an executive team, which is 5 co-PDs. That's myself, Dr. Elizabeth Bin from Cornell University, Dr. Chris Walsh from University of Maryland, Dr. Luke Laborde from Penn State, who's here. Where's Luke? No, I saw him. Welcome, Luke. And Amanda Kinchliff from University of Massachusetts. Back. That's 5, right? Good. We're incredibly fortunate to have Elizabeth Newbold as a center administrator and assistant director of Northeast of NECAFS. She keeps us connected and keeps us organized, and by us I mean everybody in this room. And I'm sure everybody has been in touch with Elizabeth over the past couple weeks. The implementation or the work of the regional center really is down across the bottom there, and this is literally from our proposal way back when, and we had identified these 2 primary areas within the network: educational project teams and special project teams. And the idea was educational project teams would focus on training and education and outreach. Special topic teams would address emerging themes as they came up. We had some ideas going into this, what the challenges would be and what the areas for more development might be. But there have been some that have come up that we didn't really predict, and so that's been exciting to see. Again, the educational project teams are largely being supported by the Training Support Stipend Program, which provides financial support for becoming a trainer in any of the 3 national curricula, but also now provides support for delivery of educational programs. So if you have a training and you're falling short on funding, we're able to fill that gap through the regional center. The other thing that's happening is with respect to the work groups. And so this afternoon and tomorrow we'll have work groups focused on educational delivery and produce safety education. And so that's grown out of this as well, having an opportunity to share best practices. What are some activities that people have integrated in the PSA curriculum, for example, that provide growers an opportunity for some hands-on practice. So sharing some of those best practices for engagement and improved learning. On the special topic teams, we have had the Special Projects Grants Program for the first 2 years of NECAFS, which was an open RFP, competitive RFP, for specific research projects that were not being addressed elsewhere. Relatively small awards to move some key topics along quickly. This is starting to morph more toward the work group model, where we're supporting specific work groups for developing specific resources. For example, the Preventive Controls work group has a subgroup focused on resources. And so the idea there is what resources specifically would help the improved delivery and knowledge distribution regarding preventive controls. Our sense initially is that there are resources that really could be very beneficial that need to be regionally specific. We have a high number of smaller processors that are not well served by current resources. And so developing some that are really specific to those groups. The other thing we've started to do is bring in some additional part-time staff to help specifically with the work group activities. So help move the work group activities along, help provide that continuity. A lot of this work is very volunteer, it's crowdsourced, and so having an individual that remains the point person has become a very effective way of doing that, and we're supporting that. Some of the other things we've done as NECAFS, we have a regular e-newsletter and listserv. If you haven't subscribed to our newsletter, I'd encourage it. If you go to the short link listed here, that will bring you to it. It's grown from 19 subscribers originally to 433. I think there are probably more people that could benefit from that. We maintain our website, of course, and the clearinghouse. How many people know about the NECAFS clearinghouse? And how many people have contributed a resource? Has anybody found a resource on, thank you, first of all, for doing that. Has anybody found a resource on the clearinghouse that's been useful? 10 responses. Okay. Approved sanitizer list. This is what happens when you delay and pause. People start to. I know there's others. What's that? Composting, compost guide sheet from Iowa State. Anything else? What else would you like to see on the clearinghouse? Guess we're done. We've held recurring webinars, 14 to date, fair number of attendees, and they've largely been regional focus, although we have seen increasing national attendance and participation. We invite presenters from across the country as topics come up. And so that's the other thing too. If you find yourself saying, I wish there was just a 1-hour quick webinar on this topic, that's something we are glad to pull together. So shoot us an email, necafs@uvm.edu. We love taking those ideas and running with them and delivering a webinar that reaches the region and others. Some of the best topics come from the network, so please feel free. The annual meeting, which is why we're all here, has become an increasingly important part of what we do. It's also a great chance for us to check in with all of you and see how we are doing and how we might improve. So to that end, I'll speak to evaluation in more detail, but we will have an evaluation sheet. What color is it, Elizabeth? Yellow? It's yellow. And we will have a box set up for returning those. I expect 100% participation. Yeah, you don't get your certificate without that. Don't ask what certificate. Training support stipend program, again, this is about supporting the training of trainers and lead trainers in the 3 currently recognized national curricula. And we also are supporting the training delivery, support 41 trainers to date and 13 delivery events. Again, very happy to provide support as needed for additional delivery events. I know folks are probably looking ahead to spring and thinking about doing some additional training, so keep that in mind. The special projects, again, early on we focused on this competitive RFP program. We're moving away from that more towards some direct funded activities. One of those includes a systematic review of needs assessments. May recall in Boston and also in Baltimore, we did a quick check-in on the group related to needs assessments, and I remember at one point, I remember the very strong reaction when I asked, should we do a needs assessment? Everybody's like, not another needs assessment. There are so many going on, and that sort of struck me as, if there are so many going on, we ought to know what they all say. So that's what this is about. This is about taking a look at what we've already done and pull them together. And so I've got a little bit more on that in a minute. We're also really excited to be working with the Vermont Law School on something called the Extension Legal Services Initiative. This is a sub-award from the Vermont Law School through a primary award from the USDA National Ag Library. We have folks from the Vermont Law School with us today. This is really looking at some of the key legal questions around the Food Safety Modernization Act, primarily the produce safety rule, and it is not limited to the region. It has a national focus. We had our first advisory board meeting 3 weeks ago, I think. And again, that advisory board is from across the country. The initial activity was to identify the key research questions that now the clinic, Center for Ag and Food Systems at at Vermont Law School will explore as research questions. So these are law students taking on some of the key legal questions around Food Safety Modernization Act. Things like liability, right? So, I mean, we're not really addressing that by and large as a group right now. And so that's something that a legal clinic, a law school clinic can really dig into and help us all understand what does that really mean, because it turns out it's not one thing. So, you know, and helping parse what the current knowledge, legal knowledge is, but also how it relates to the produce safety rule in particular and to growers. The clearinghouse, this has been a goal from day one, really. One of the key things that came out of that very early meeting in Amherst was, you know, there are tons of resources out there, and not everybody's aware of them, and finding them easily can be challenging. And so the goal of the NECAFS clearinghouse was collect and curate resources in one place specific to produce safety rule and preventive controls for human food. A guiding principle is not to duplicate the resource, but rather provide a link to its host site. So again, it's meant to be a clearinghouse that directs people to the host site that actually developed the resource for a couple of reasons. One, I want to make sure that people are getting the most current version of the resource. Two, it's important for the traffic to actually go to that host site so the host site actually knows how many people are using their resource and whether or not it's being useful to people. And they also get credit for that in terms of reporting. Our goal over the next year is to really increase this peer-to-peer collaboration and review. So right now it is pretty much purely crowdsourced, wide open. You have a resource, you can post it on the clearinghouse. What we'd like to do is start a peer review process where a resource you can submit a resource and say, I would like to have this reviewed by a peer group. And then if it goes through that review successfully, it gets marked as such. And so the idea is to start to really improve and increase the quality of the resources based on peer review and communicate that to the users. Increasing knowledge of what actually exists. Again, this just echoes the fact there are a lot of resources out there. We're not all sure what's what and where they are, so trying to make that easier. And really leveraging the work done in one place wherever it can be used. So it's not limited to the Northeast region, and in fact, over the next year, as a result of our new regional center national structure, we will start to have this become much more of a nationally branded clearinghouse, so that we collect resources more from across the country, but also have them distributed the same. And it is both produce safety rule and preventive controls resources. This is roughly what it looks like. It is a responsive design, so it has been designed from the start to work as well on smartphones and tablets as it does on a desktop computer, because I know oftentimes we're in the field looking for resources, and so being able to easily navigate on a small screen is helpful. A recent development in the clearinghouse this past year was the category, adding a category to collect TAN questions and answers. And so Tucker mentioned this as being something that's been helpful for him. So everybody familiar with the TAN, Technical Assistance Network? There are multiple, but let's just pretend there's one for right now. Thank you. And so you put a question in, anybody can submit a question to the TAN, it gets reviewed, and an answer is provided. The challenge is that that process is one-to-one. I've asked a question, I get a response. Nobody else knows. Right? So we wanted to see if there was a way to collect those responses on a voluntary basis from the owner, and the owner is the one that submitted the question and received the response. That's the intent here, is to provide a section of the clearinghouse that allows for people who have submitted a TAN question and received a response to post it so that others don't have to ask the same question, and so that hopefully we clarify some things. So that exists now, and it has been used significantly. Has anybody other than Tucker used a TAN Q&A? Thanks, Phil. Phil Toko, Michigan State, folks. Thanks, Phil. Hob, you too? Great. So systematic review of needs assessment. So again, this was sort of kicked off when I cringed at the response of people yelling at me for suggesting a new needs assessment. We are fortunate to have Hannah Harwood Doyle working on this part-time for us. It started with a literature review, and do you remember how many sources we currently have? Yeah. So there have been at least 40 needs assessments published, and then a number of others unpublished. And so, and this isn't specific to the region, but it's food safety broadly, looking at the needs assessment of practitioners. And so the idea is, what can we learn, or sort of, number one, what's been done already, and what can we learn from it? And so what we've identified so far, and this is really early stage, there's a fair bit more to be done here, but in looking at those 40 some odd publications, 5 themes have emerged. One is, of course, knowledge. So delivering and distributing knowledge about food safety. The second is, there's a little bit of nuance here because I think we sometimes conflate the first two. Training. And what this is focused on is more technical skills. So now that you have the knowledge, how do you practice that knowledge? How do you implement it? How do you change behavior and adopt new practice? Worker training. Anybody running into challenges with worker training? Is anybody running into challenges with worker training? You are. You may not know it, right? Yeah, but yeah. So that second level of training, right? So we've done grower trainings, and growers are trained up, at least one grower at each enterprise. But then that second level of training, how does that get extended to everybody in the organization that is coming into contact with food? So that's been heard loud and clear. Capital, of course, the money involved in adopting new practices, in additional time spent on documentation, in general, cost of compliance, not just infrastructure and equipment, but time. Nobody gets into farming to keep records about worker trainings, right? So there's a cost here. It's oftentimes an opportunity cost. The time involved in it, and also attitude. So what is motivating the change in regulation or requirement? What is motivating the change in practice? And then having the confidence to apply the knowledge we've developed into actual practice. So I thought that was an incredibly concise summary that Hannah's been able to arrive at from all these references. This is kind of interesting too. This is a chart showing some of the resources, some of the references by topic, the topic that has emerged or the theme that has emerged over time. And so on the left-hand side was back in the 2000s. This is where the primary focus was good agricultural practices with voluntary and/or third-party certification. And on the right-hand side is, anything from 2010 on, really with a focus on the FSMA produce safety rule. So this is focused specifically on produce. You can see the themes are largely the same. The asterisks note the number of references that identified this as an emerging theme. So these are some of the areas of need for knowledge or technical training that have emerged through a variety of publications. Any surprises? Anything missing? Good. Some of the evaluation we've done for NECAFS, this came from, this is largely based on the annual meeting last year, and it helped to inform our proposal to the USDA for continuing funding. So from last year, we only had a 43% response rate. I'm a positive guy, really. So let's make sure to fill out evaluations, please. Elizabeth and I really want to hear from you on this. It does help inform what we do, not only at the annual meeting, but what we do year-round. So we want to make sure we're serving you. But the good news is, of those 43 so people, large numbers learned something new at the annual meeting, and over the preceding year, a large number met somebody new, and that's really, to me, a key part of this. Is are we helping to encourage learning and continuing for all of us to be students as well as the stakeholders we serve, and are we connecting with each other? There's also significant instances of intent to change or to apply new knowledge. So picking up a new trick or a new resource from somebody else and planning to work it into our own work. The evaluation also articulated a continuing need for communication within the region, and so Elizabeth and I spend a lot of time focused on are we communicating enough but not too much with you all. So if you have any specific thoughts on that, we'd love to hear it. There's still a need for additional research, still a need for additional education, and there are a number of hard-to-reach audiences that we all need to focus on spending more time and effort with. So again, that last one is something that can be supported by the Training Support Stipend Program. If there are audiences that just take a little extra lift, whether it's more time, more travel, or more incentive to attend a training, we're glad to help make that happen. So going forward, as I mentioned, we've been very grateful to have the FDA funding for the first 3 years. We actually will have, we plan to do some no-cost extension and carryover of some phase 1 funding to continue NECAFS work. We're also very grateful and fortunate to have received a USDA NEFA FSOP award. The project objectives are largely consistent with where we started. The feedback has been what we're doing is largely supportive and effective for this network. And so, by and large, it's steady as we go. It's continuing to build regional capacity and competency related to food safety, education, outreach, and training. It's continuing to facilitate regional communication and collaboration. We do intend to expand work group activities. So in the early years, we weren't quite sure what those work groups should look like and what topics they ought to take on. I think we're starting to actually have some really solid needs identified and some really clear themes to explore. In 2 years from now, they may be different themes. But the idea is establish this work group model and start really digging in together. We do plan to expand the clearinghouse. Again, it started as primarily a regional a resource with regional focus. We do intend to have that develop more of a national relevance and contribution and use. So that will take some effort, and if you have specific thoughts on that or want to be more involved in it directly, please let us know. The first step would be getting an account on the clearinghouse. You don't need an account to use it, you need an account to contribute resources. So it would be great for you to have an account, and also by establishing an account you become a potential peer reviewer, which would be great to have a broader population to work from. One of our roles in the new structure of the regional centers and the national activities is the lead regional center, which is the University of Florida team leading the Southern Center. When the new awards came through, we coordinated a bit with the other regional centers and specifically the lead regional center and talked about, of those lead activities, those national lead activities, can we come up with a model where different regional centers take on leadership of specific national activities? And so, for example, evaluation nationally is going to be led by the Southern Center. The review of alternate curricula is going to be led by the North Central Regional Center. The review of add-on and supplemental material is going to be led by the Western Center. NECAFS has stepped up to lead in consolidation of resources and communication nationally. So we're going to be working at not only at a regional level, but increasingly at a national level to really collect resources from across the country that can be used anywhere. But also starting to focus some of our communications highlighting success stories and resources and best practices more nationally, not only regionally. And that includes capturing success stories and impact stories. We're getting to a point now in this activity where I know I'm starting to see some very, very real positive change on the ground. And collecting some of those impacts and some of those success stories to demonstrate the value of the work is becoming increasingly important. And that's something that we'll be focused on. So again, if you have specific stories that you think are particularly compelling, we would love to hear them and follow up with you. We're also, so that's part of this unified reporting plan, is collecting some of these success stories, some of these impact statements or narratives, and getting them to a broader audience, including our federal partners. It also has a tie-in to a more unified evaluation approach. So, for example, PSA trainings, the Southern Center has developed a pre-post test. Has anybody in the room used the pre-post test? Great. So you have the normal PSA evaluation, and that really evaluates the training. The pre-post test is a way of measuring the growth of knowledge prior to the training, after the training, comparing pre and post. And so we're looking to actually use that increasingly across the country to really understand how these trainings are impacting knowledge among the cohort. So we talked a little bit about impact already. And again, we have a focus on collecting stakeholder feedback through you all here, but also doing some evaluation of our other programming, webinars, and some of the work group activities. So this is generally where we're headed in the future. We have the same 5 main objectives. They're starting to take on a slightly different flavor depending on where we're focused. So any questions or comments so far on NECAFS past and where we're headed? We have wireless mics, or you can shout. How's the temperature? Okay, good, great. So thoughts on NECAFS? Elizabeth, did I miss anything? All right. No thoughts? Okay. So let's talk about the next couple days. We did an agenda review. Does anybody have questions on the agenda and where things are happening? The full details are in the program. So what are some of the expectations? Again, it's primarily an opportunity to connect in person with our partners, to meet new collaborators and peers, to ask questions, to engage in discussion, identify some emerging themes together, and maybe even have a few aha moments. The work group approach is something that we've really invested in this year, and it's based on feedback from previous years that people really wanted time to dig in together around specific topics. So to that end, if you look at the agenda in your program, you'll note a couple of parallel sessions. If anybody is a facilitator of one of those sessions, could you stand, please? So we have a produce safety, stay standing, please. We have Aaron, Phil, Gretchen, Betsy, and then tomorrow we have others. Where are Dave and Andrea? Andrea, Dave? Dave's getting coffee apparently. All right. So these are the facilitators of the sessions. So some of my thoughts on the work groups. We really want to encourage engagement. So if you are more quiet and reserved, don't be. Lori, feel free to speak up. Michael, don't be bashful. Okay, all right. Also consider this practice of the rule of 3. So if you've spoken, wait for at least 2 other people to speak before speaking again. And it's just, so if you are more active and if you think by speaking, that's cool. Just take a break. Let Lori and Mike jump in, right? So the facilitators are going to be focused on facilitating, and so to that end, we do need some helpers for timekeeping. So if you're in a session and you feel like you can do that, watch time and also participate, great. Let the facilitator know that you're willing to help, so they can really focus on making sure people are engaged and that the topics are being explored. The other thing is we may need additional note takers, and the reason for that is we're reporting out tomorrow afternoon, and so just making sure we have a good way of capturing some of the thoughts and some of the discussion. It doesn't need to be verbatim. Something along the lines of minutes from a discussion is fine. Is that good? Anybody have other ideas for making sure the work groups are super productive? Great. And so the other thing I wanted to highlight is this meeting really has changed over the years. I was thinking back to our first meeting in Boston, and even last year in Baltimore. This has been an evolving thing, and it really has benefited from everybody's feedback. And I joke about the 43% response rate. I know that everybody else has talked to Elizabeth or I, even if you didn't fill out an evaluation. But it'd be great to have the evaluation filled out and get them to us before you leave. And remember, this is for the entire network, even the people who aren't here. We will try to capture the outcomes from the event. It's being recorded, so we'll be able to share some highlights with people who couldn't make it over the next 2 days. And that was what I intended to cover. Elizabeth, did you have anything you wanted to capture? Anybody else have anything they wanted to bring up? Okay, we can break early then, I guess, huh?